In Southern California, the best kind of fire is the fire that never starts. We have 25 million people living in Southern California. People are starting a lot of fires. About 95% of all fires in Southern California are caused by humans. We just experienced the Eaton and Palisades fire that was completely devastating, catastrophic. We wanted to understand what are the primary causes of fire and where are these fires occurring. And so we created a GIS dashboard, a wonderful data set going back about 25, 30 years that show all the ignitions throughout Southern California. And we evaluated where those ignitions were falling on the landscape. When you think about Southern California, we know that humans are causing these fires. You think about where are humans on the landscape, they're along the roads. They're pulling over on the roads, they're dragging chains, if they're pulling a boat behind their car, they're throwing cigarettes out the window. These are really the locations where we suspected we were going to have a lot of ignitions. And so what we found is that indeed the majority of ignitions were happening along these roadside corridors. Certain corridors really pop out as having an incredible number of ignitions. So some places to highlight are Highway 5 that cuts right between the Los Padres and Angeles National Forest, and many of the thoroughfares going through the Angeles National Forest really pop out on the map as being ignition hotspots. So we now have this piece of information. We know that along our roadsides, that these are the areas we should be targeting to reduce ignitions. But the roadside corridors are vast in Southern California. So we're talking thousands of miles of roads. Where do you begin? And so we looked at vegetation patterns along these roadsides and tried to correlate vegetation to ignitions, roadside areas that have a high cover of non-native grass. There's 6 times greater ignition density in these areas. So that became very clear. These should be our targets for vegetation management, that we can reduce the cover of these non-native species in the roadside. And what we would like to do, and where appropriate, is to replace them with native, less ignitable species. And so what we put in their place is a big question. We want to make sure that if we're putting vegetation back out on the landscape, that we are able to truly reduce the opportunity for ignitions. And so we have a partnership with UC Santa Barbara, and they are helping us understand the best methods for grass abatement, and they're helping us also understand which native species are most ideal to reduce ignitions in these landscapes.
A lot of our roadways and areas around the wildland-urban interface, these areas are invaded by non-native annual grasses. These grasses are from Mediterranean Europe, and they're really good at spreading and proliferating here because we have a similar climate. However, in these areas, after they germinate and grow and die, they leave around a lot of fine fuels. And because they're so fine, dry and dead in the early summer, they're very easy to ignite. So simple sparks can ignite them. And so if we could replace that with a type of vegetation cover that is less ignitable, then we could hopefully reduce ignitions on the landscape. One of the key questions is, if we're going to replace annual grasses with a less ignitable native type of vegetation, then we should really know what vegetation is less ignitable. And so to test that, we go out in the field and we collect native plants from the field and we bring them back into the laboratory. And also those non-native grasses I talked about, we harvest them, bring them back, and then in a controlled setting, we light them on fire to actually measure their ignitability and other flammability components. And then we can watch those fires on playback, and we can measure a lot of attributes about the fire: how quickly it spreads, how tall the flames are, whether or not it ignited, and then we can compare the flammability of those different types of plants. With the results that we have comparing native species and the non-native island grasses from our combustion testing, we have together developed a potential list of species that we think will be appropriate for ignition reduction. As a scientist, I want to make sure the science I produce is going to be usable and is used by agencies and land managers. And from the Forest Service side, this partnership is critical because where they may not have the capacity to ask these really intense research questions, that's where the university comes in. And so we can meet each other's needs there, and having, by working together from the onset to co-produce that is the best way to move forward.